biased verdicts cast long shadows over the crumbling facade of a venerable courthouse that dominated Main Street like an ancient sentinel bearing the scars of 1,000 battles. On a biting Thursday morning, Melanie Carter, a determined 34-year-old mother of three, ascended those time-worn steps with her appointed attorney, Sam Reynolds, whose steady presence belied the tremor in her grasp. Despite her shaking hand, her eyes burned with a fierce, unyielding hope as she entered courtroom 5A. There, beneath a suffocating atmosphere, she sat upright in a modest green dress, the same cherished garment reserved for the quiet reverence of Sunday services at a local house of worship, while her tired, deep brown eyes clung desperately to the promise of tomorrow. Accused over a mislaid bottle of unlabeled pills, her elderly mother's heart medication mistakenly found during an ordinary traffic stop, Melanie's repeated pleas, meant to explain a mere oversight, instead dissolved into the void of indifferent ears. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy wooden doors parted for Judge Thomas Caldwell, who strode cloaked in a dark robe trailing like a harbinger of doom. To the world, he was the very picture of authority and unyielding conviction, yet behind closed chambers, his decisions had long whispered a tale of bias. The prosecutor, a brisk and dispassionate young attorney named David Perry, flipped through his notes with a detached air, declaring, "This is a case of possession without intent to distribute, guidelines point to probation or a brief stint in jail." In stark contrast, Sam Reynolds rose, his voice quivering with earnest conviction as he pleaded, "Your Honor, Miss Carter is no criminal. She is a devoted mother, a tireless caregiver, and a cornerstone of her community. She endures 2 grueling jobs, one at a modest eatery and another as a cleaning supervisor at a local hospital, and those pills were her mother's, carelessly misplaced rather than maliciously concealed." Judge Caldwell's steely, ice-blue gaze bore into Melanie, his face an unmoved mask of indifference. After a silence that stretched like an eternity, he intoned, "Miss Carter, the law is immutable, not subject to excuses or sentiment. Therefore, I sentence you to life imprisonment with parole eligibility only after 25 years. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as her lawyer stammered in protest, warning that such a verdict defied every guideline. With one resounding strike of his gavel that echoed like distant thunder, the judge silenced all dissent. As the clink of handcuffs marked the closing of a tragic chapter, Melanie's blurred vision caught her whispered plea, barely audible against the sterile clamor, as she begged someone to alert her children, left waiting in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. Overhead, dark, morning clouds gathered as if the very sky lamented the cruelty unfolding within those hallowed walls. High above this theater of injustice, on the 12th floor of City Hall, Mayor Anthony Williams surveyed the sprawling urban vista with visionary pride, a man who had long labored to mend the fractures of a divided town. His reverie was shattered when his assistant, Lisa Grant, burst into his office, breathless, "Sir, you need to see this, it's everywhere on the news." The television flickered to life, revealing Melanie's tear-streaked face as reporters recounted the shocking sentence, the ticker scrolling in icy clarity, "Local mother sentenced to life for a minor drug offense." In that moment, the mayor's cherished coffee slipped from his grasp, shattering on the floor like broken promises. His heart clenched as he realized the unthinkable. Melanie Carter was none other than Melanie Williams, his wife of over a decade, a secret kept to shelter their children from the relentless glare of public scrutiny. In a voice low yet resolute, he commanded, "Cancel all my meetings. Get District Attorney Rachel Chen on the line immediately." Questions whirled in his mind. How had this calamity come to pass? Why had Melanie not confided in him about her arrest? They had vowed that, if ever danger came, they would shield their family above all else. On the other end of the line, Rachel Chen's tone was taut with urgency. "Mayor, I just saw the news. This sentence is outrageous. It falls completely outside accepted guidelines." Anthony paused, then with a trembling confession delivered the bombshell, "Melanie Carter is my wife." A moment of stunned silence followed, punctured by a faltering, "You're what?" as Rachel absorbed the revelation. "We kept it hidden," Anthony continued, voice breaking with regret and determination, "to protect the kids, but now I can't sit back. I must fight for her, publicly." His declaration sent a jolt through the air as his legal mind began mapping out a plan to comb through every previous ruling by Judge Caldwell for signs of a prejudiced pattern. Just then, a firm knock announced Tom Harris, his loyal chief of staff, entering with a stack of urgent papers. "Sir, the press is already outside. Rumor has it that you can cancel your meetings after the sentencing. They're demanding answers." With a deep, steadying breath, Anthony rose, proclaiming a press conference at 5 p.m., and the city braced itself for a revelation that promised to shake the very foundations of its justice system. Inside City Hall's cramped press room, reporters from every corner, local scribes to national broadcasters, crowded together, their cameras fixed on a wooden podium where Mayor Williams was soon to speak. The air vibrated with whispered anticipation, the murmur of hastily typed headlines blending with the rustle of notepads. Backstage, Anthony stared into a dusty mirror, his tie askew and weariness etched upon his face. "Are you ready, sir?" his chief of staff softly inquired. Tightening his tie, he nodded, steeling himself for the onslaught. At exactly 5 p.m., under a barrage of camera flashes that exploded like sudden bursts of light, he stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening," he began, voice calm yet heavy with personal pain. "Today I speak not merely as your mayor, but as a husband and father." Instantly, the room fell into an expectant hush. Yesterday, Melanie Carter, a devoted mother of 3, was condemned to life imprisonment for a trivial offense. A punishment so severe it defies both reason and mercy. "But there is something more you must know. Melanie Carter is my wife." In that charged moment, the room erupted, reporters shouted, cameras clicked relentlessly, and a collective gasp filled the space. With an outstretched hand, Anthony hushed the assembly and revealed a treasured family photo, Melanie smiling by a lakeside during a sunlit summer gathering with their 3 children. "This is my family. Melanie is far more than a case number. She is a mother, a daughter, a wife, and she deserves justice." His voice hardened as he struck out against an unjust system. "But this isn't solely about one woman, it is a battle against a deeply entrenched bias that has tainted our courts for far too long, and it ends now." In a softer, almost secretive tone meant for his children, he added, "I'm sorry we had to hide our love, but I promise you, your mother will come home." With that, he stepped away, leaving the room in a simmering state of shock and resolve. In a dim office on the 3rd floor of the courthouse building, District Attorney Rachel Chen labored over piles of case files and yellow sticky notes scrawled with urgent annotations. Her assistant, Tom Parker, burst in with a fresh stack of documents. "You won't believe this," he murmured, voice laced with disbelief. "Judge Caldwell's record from the past decade reveals a disturbing trend. Black and Hispanic defendants routinely face sentences that are double or even triple those given to white defendants for the same offenses." Rachel's eyes darted over the spreadsheets and court records, the gravity of the inequity searing her heart. "How did no one speak up?" Tom whispered, his head shaking as if in silent despair. Moments later, her phone buzzed. It was Mayor Williams. "Rachel, it's done. I went public." His voice resonated with the heavy toll of recent events. "Brace yourself, the backlash will be brutal." But Anthony's tone was unwavering. "I care about Melanie, and I care about fixing this broken system." With a resolute nod, Rachel vowed, "I'm taking every one of Caldwell's past cases to the State Judicial Review Board." If he thought prejudice could be hidden beneath his robe, he is gravely mistaken. As she ended the call, Rachel gazed out her window at the courthouse across the street, where storm clouds loomed ominously, a fitting mirror to the turmoil that now threatened to upend the city's very foundations. The next morning, the courthouse square had transformed into a pulsating epicenter of defiance. Thousands thronged the streets, brandishing handmade placards and chanting slogans demanding justice for Melanie, no more bias, and equal justice for all. At the vanguard of the crowd, Reverend Mark Ellis, a dignified voice of civil rights, commanded attention through a crackling megaphone. "Today, we rise together, not divided by skin color, not split by wealth, but united in our demand for justice." His words reverberated through the mass, while at his side, Melanie's eldest son Michael clutched a faded photograph of his mother. With a voice trembling yet resolute, he declared, "My mom isn't a criminal. She's the one who tucks us in at night, who works 2 jobs just to put food on our table. She did not deserve this, and none of us should be punished by a system that judges us by our skin." The crowd's roar swelled into an anthem of solidarity as local businesses shuttered their doors in protest, and workers from every sector, nurses, teachers, union members, joined the march. Nearby, a TV van broadcast the spectacle live, while social media exploded with hashtags calling for reform and accountability. Inside a sparsely lit office, Judge Caldwell sat hunched over his desk, his hands quivering as he scrolled through relentless headlines. Mayor's wife condemned by prejudiced judge, bias in the bench exposed, protests ignite over unjust sentence. His phone buzzed nonstop as colleagues, friends, and even family members distanced themselves. With another swig of whiskey, his unsteady grip betrayed the dawning realization that the State Judicial Review Board had already scheduled an emergency hearing to scrutinize his 15-year record. In that moment, Buried under layers of legal jargon and formalities, the undeniable truth of his racial bias, long hidden behind the pretense of justice, threatened to crush him. For the first time in his career, Caldwell felt the noose of accountability tightening, and his world began to crumble. In a stark, cold jail cell far removed from the clamor of protest, Melanie sat on a narrow cot, fingers clutching a letter smuggled in by a sympathetic guard. Michael's words, scrawled in hurried ink, pleaded, "Mom, everyone knows about us now. People are fighting for you, don't lose hope. We love you, and we're coming to bring you home." Those simple, heartfelt lines cut through the despair of her isolation like a beam of light, reminding her that even in the bleakest darkness, hope could still flicker. Outside, as the oppressive storm clouds began to break apart, fragile shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom, a subtle promise that the fight was not yet over. Later that day, in a grand marble building bathed in the soft light of dawn, the Virginia State Appeals Court assembled in a stately courtroom. In room 4B, a sea of anxious faces, activists, journalists, legal experts, and ordinary citizens sat on rigid wooden benches, their eyes fixed on what would be a pivotal hearing not only for Melanie's fate but for the very soul of the city's judicial system. At the defense table stood Benjamin Carter, one of the nation's most celebrated civil rights attorneys, his crisp suit and calm demeanor belying a readiness for a fierce legal battle. Beside him, District Attorney Rachel Chen's tablet brimmed with meticulously organized evidence, files, statistics, and records that chronicled years of injustice inflicted by Judge Caldwell. In the gallery, Mayor Williams sat with his children, Michael, Ava, and Jaden, their faces etched with both exhaustion and a hopeful determination that had become a beacon for many. A panel of 3 judges, Judge Maria Rodriguez, Judge Thomas Chen, and Judge Robert Willis, entered with gravitas, their presence instantly commanding silence. "This court is now in session," Judge Rodriguez announced in a measured tone, "to review the case of the state versus Melanie Carter and to investigate allegations of judicial misconduct against Judge Caldwell." With measured intensity, Benjamin Carter rose to address the bench. "Your Honors, we stand here not merely to defend one woman, but to expose a long legacy of systemic bias that has poisoned our judiciary for over a decade." At his signal, a remote click brought a large screen to life behind him, displaying a labyrinth of spreadsheets, charts, and bar graphs. The data chronicled over 15 years of Judge Caldwell's rulings, cases where Black and Hispanic defendants routinely received sentences 3 to 4 times harsher than those of their white counterparts for identical charges. "These aren't just numbers," Benjamin asserted, "they are the stolen futures of mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, the silent casualties of prejudice disguised as justice." Gasps rippled through the room as he pressed on. Then, District Attorney Rachel Chen stepped forward with a thick folder, her voice precise and unwavering as she recounted her investigation. "In our review, we uncovered letters, case notes, and even internal emails that reveal explicit bias against minority defendants, bias that did not cease when Judge Caldwell ascended to the bench, but rather was cloaked in legal verbiage. The most damning evidence arrived in the form of security footage. One clip showed a young white man, charged with possession, receiving a lenient sentence after a friendly exchange with Judge Caldwell. The other revealed a young Black woman facing the same charge met with contempt and an unduly harsh penalty. The stark disparity was undeniable, and as the footage played during a brief recess, even the judge's pallid features betrayed a trace of sweat. Melanie was then escorted back into the courtroom. With quiet dignity, she walked to the stand, her hands trembling as she smoothed the fabric of her modest dress. Seated at the front, her children clutched their father's hand tightly as she began her testimony in a soft yet unyielding tone. "Your Honors, I am not here to beg for sympathy or special treatment. I stand before you because my children need me, and I need them. Yes, I erred by not keeping my mother's pills in a properly labeled bottle, but does that single mistake justify a life sentence? Does it mean I should be torn away from my children forever?" Her words, raw and piercing, hung in the charged silence of the room, drawing a solitary tear from Michael's eye as even the most seasoned reporters fought back their own. After she stepped down, the courtroom's silence deepened, a silence that spoke of shared sorrow and simmering outrage. Outside, the protest had swelled into a formidable movement. Thousands now filled the square, clutching signs that demanded justice for Melanie, no more bias, and down with prejudice. At the epicenter, Reverend Mark Ellis, his voice amplified through a megaphone, declared, "We are not here out of anger, but out of love, for Melanie, for her children, and for the very idea of justice." Meanwhile, television vans broadcast the historic scene live to millions, and social media erupted with fervent hashtags, galvanizing support from public figures across the nation. Back inside, District Attorney Rachel Chen delivered her final argument with steely determination. "Your Honors, the evidence is irrefutable. The law was not applied equally in Judge Caldwell's courtroom." Melanie Carter is not an isolated case. She represents hundreds whose lives have been upended by systemic bias. Today, you have the power to right this wrong for her, for those who came before, and for those who will follow. Benjamin Carter, in his closing remarks, echoed the same impassioned plea, reminding the Assembly that this case transcended one individual. It was a clarion call for fairness, for equality, for justice. As the judges retired to deliberate, the courtroom was shrouded in an almost palpable silence, heavy with the weight of impending change. Hours later, the judges re-entered, and Judge Maria Rodriguez spoke with calm, resolute authority. "This court finds that the sentencing of Melanie Carter was grossly disproportionate and tainted by bias. We hereby vacate her sentence and order her immediate release." The announcement exploded into jubilant cheers. Melanie's children rushed forward, enveloping her in tearful embraces, while Mayor Williams clutched his wife tightly, whispering, "You're coming home." Judge Rodriguez continued, "Furthermore, we recommend that Judge Caldwell be referred immediately to the State Judicial Review Board for investigation and suspension." Outside, the city erupted in celebration. Church bells rang, car horns blared, and neighbors embraced as the news spread like wildfire. Stepping out of the courthouse, Melanie emerged hand in hand with her children and her husband, a living symbol of victory over systemic injustice. Speaking into a reporter's microphone, her voice rang clear and hopeful. "This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to every mother, every father, every child who deserves a fair chance. But our work is not done. Justice is not a moment, it is a movement." As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the courthouse steps in a golden glow, the struggle was far from over, but tonight, at least, justice had finally prevailed.